This topic is about psychological view of self, and we are going to talk about three individuals, specifically Freud, Erikson, and Horney. So first, let's go to Sigmund Freud. He was the founding father of psychoanalysis. This is a method for treating mental illnesses and also a theory which explains human behavior. He believed that events in our childhood have a great influence on our adult lives and it shapes our personality. So, for example, anxiety originating from traumatic experiences in a person's past is hidden from consciousness and it may cause problems during adulthood. He articulated and refined the concepts of the unconscious, infantile sexuality, and repression. And he proposed a tripartite account of the mind structure where all as part of a radically new conceptual and therapeutic frame of reference uh, for understanding the human psychological development and treating the abnormal mental conditions. Notwithstanding the multiple manifestations of psychoanalysis as it exists today, it can almost all of it, no, can be fundamentally bring back with respects, and it can be traced directly back to Freud's original work. So if you can see the slide, it shows an iceberg. So you might you might have recognized the iceberg of Freud. He developed a topographical model of the mind whereby he described the features of the mind structure and function, and he used the iceberg as an analogy to describe the three levels of the mind. Wherein on the surface, you can see it is the consciousness or the conscious mind. So it consists of those thoughts that are the focus of our attention now. And this is seen as a tip of the iceberg. Next is the subconscious. It is consists of all which can be retrieved from memory. These are the things that we could be aware of if we wanted to or if we tried to. And the third is the most significant region. It is the unconscious. Here lies the processes that are the real cause of most of our behavior. And like an iceberg, the most important part of the mind is the part, of course, that we cannot see. So it's the biggest part. For example, he found out that some events and desires were often too frightening, no, too traumatic, or too painful for his patients to acknowledge, and they believed that such information was locked away in the unconscious mind. So this can happen through the process of repression. So we will see later what repression is. The goal of psychoanalysis is to make the unconscious part of the mind conscious. Why do you have to do that? In order for us to we have to make the unconscious conscious in order for us to better understand ourselves and to better control our emotions or our reactions to certain stimulus. So he later developed a more structural model of the mind comprising the id, ego, and superego. So that is from the iceberg theory. He further refined it and he came up with this three. So this is what he called the psychic apparatus. These are not a physical areas within the brain, but they are hypothetical conceptualizations that are important to mental functions. So these are essential parts of the human personality. So he assumed that the id, it operates at an unconscious level, and according to the pleasure principle, the id is comprises of two biological instincts or drives, which he called the eros and the thanatos. So eros is life instinct and thanatos is death instinct, the opposite. So eros, it helps the individual to survive. It directs life sustaining activities such as respiration, eating, and sex. And the energy created by the life instinct, it is known as the libido. The opposite of it is the thanatos or the death instinct. It is viewed as a set of destructive forces present in all human beings. So, if these destructive forces are directed outward onto other people, it is expressed as aggression and violence. So, Freud believed that Eros is stronger than Thanatos, thus enabling people to survive rather than self-destruct. And the ego, uh, it is the it is considered as the reality. It is developed from the id during infancy, wherein the ego's goal is to satisfy the demands of the id, but in a safe and socially acceptable way. So, in contrast to the id, the ego follows the reality principle and it operates both in the conscious and unconscious mind, wherein after the ego is superego. It is developed during early childhood, where during this time the child identifies with the same sex parent. So, for example, if the child is a female, she identifies more, relates more, or is closer to the mom. So, same is true with if the child is male, he's closer with the dad. So, it is responsible for ensuring moral standards, and that these moral standards are followed. So the superego operates on the morality principle and it motivates us to behave in a socially responsible and acceptable manner. So it is just like conscience. It's what's telling us to do right. And then the ego is what's actually the thing that we that we should or that we do, that we are actually doing. So the id is just a pleasure, always seeks pleasure. So the basic dilemma of all human existence is that these elements uh, of the psychic apparatus, it makes us demand, and then those demands are incompatible with the other two. So there is what we call an inner conflict. So for example, the superego can make a person feel guilty if rules are not followed. So when there is a conflict between the goals of the id and superego, no, the ego must act as a referee, or as the ego should mediate the conflict. So it can deploy various defense mechanism in order to cope with this conflict, in order for us to not be overwhelmed by anxiety. So here are examples of the coping mechanisms. So there we can see repression, denial, projection, displacement, regression, and sublimation. So you can see there the descriptions and examples for each. Freud's psychosexual stages are as follows: the oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital stage. So in a highly repressive Victorian society in which Freud lived and uh, women worked with women in particular, they were forced to repress their sexual needs during that time. So, in many cases, this repression of the women's sexual needs results in some form of neurotic illnesses. Because if we can remember, sexual needs are eros, no? They are they are they are basic life needs, no? So if it's repressed, if they are not satisfied sexually during that time in the Victorian era, uh, Freud noticed that these women formed some kind of neurotic illnesses. Freud sought to understand the nature and variety of these illnesses by retracing the sexual history of his patients, and although he did not just investigate the sexual experiences, but he he tried to study about what the patient feels, no? The patient's wishes, desires, their experience of love, their history of hate, shame, guilt, and fear. And then on how these patients handled these powerful emotions. It was with this that led to the most controversial part of Freud's work, the psychosexual development and the Oedipus complex. So Freud believed that children are born with a libido, which is a sexual pleasure or urge, but and that the child needs to successfully successfully complete this psychosexual stages in order to attain a healthy development, and where the child during this stage, each stage, the child seeks pleasure from a different form of object. So to be psychologically healthy, we must successfully complete each stage where mental abnormality can occur if a stage is not completed successfully, and if the person becomes fixated in a particular stage and cannot move on. So this particular theory shows how adult personality is determined by childhood experiences. So for example, here on the oral stage, it is a stage that the child must go through and must complete. The example there is mouth sucking, mga, mga ano siya, ng fixated something sa mga activities sa mouth. So from sucking, swallowing, etc. etc. And if ma-fixate ang child sa amo na nga activities, so for example, again on the oral stage, na-fixate siya be kay naging force feed siya, or it's either nga gin deprive siya of food, or gin early siya ginwin or ginlutas. Although hindi ito makita ang immediate result sa child at the moment, but he may develop oral activities or vices also when he comes into adulthood. So, for example, smoking, dependency, aggression, those are vices or characteristics or behavior that is seen from those nga na-fixate sa oral stage. Next is we go with Erik Erikson. Erikson maintained that personality develops in a predetermined order through 8 stages. 8 stages naman iya of psychosocial development. So kay Freud, there were 5 psychosexual stages, and kay Erikson, there are 8 psychosocial stages, no? From infancy to adulthood. So during each stage, the person experiences a psychosocial crisis, which could have a positive or negative outcome for personal development. And these crises are of psychosocial nature because psychosocial nga may psychological needs ang individual, correct? But this may conflict with the needs of the society. So that's why it's called psychosocial. According to the theory, successful completion of each stage results in a healthy personality and the acquisition pagidya some basic virtues. So the same lang since neo-Freudian siya nga psychologist, may relate sa study ni Freud ang iyang stages, but nag-add siya sang acquisition sang basic virtues if successfully pass mo ang each stages. So these basic virtues are characteristic strengths which the ego can use to resolve subsequent crises. So of course, failure to successfully complete a stage can result in a reduced ability to complete further stages kaya wala mo na attain ang basic value. And therefore, you will have a more unhealthy personality and sense of self. So these stages, however, if wala mo na successfully complete, they can be resolved successfully at a later time. So as you can see, what I mean by at a later time, kay may specific age group siya. No, so we have here the eighth psychosocial crisis. So first, the trust versus mistrust. It is the first stage. So it begins at birth and continues approximately until 18 months of age. And during this stage, the infant is uncertain about the world in which they live in because, well, it's still an infant, and it just looks towards their primary caregiver for stability and consistency of care. So, who is this primary caregiver? Of course, the mother. And success in this stage will lead to the virtue of hope, and by developing a sense of trust, the infant can have hope that as new crises arise, no, if makato na siya sa autonomy versus shame, there is a real possibility na that other people will be there as a source of support. So need niya ay maging successful in the trust versus mistrust in order to proceed with the other. So although failing to acquire the virtue of hope, it will lead to the development of fear. So ma-proceed sa autonomy versus shame nga ang dalaya is fear. Okay? And this infant will carry the basic sense of mistrust with them to other relationships, and it may result to anxiety, of course, and heightened insecurities, and of course the overfeeling of mistrust in the world around them. So during the autonomy versus shame and doubt, it occurs between the ages of 18 months to approximately 3 years old. And this is a stage where children are focused on developing a sense of personal control over physical skills and also a sense of independence. Success in this stage will lead to the virtue of will, and if children in this stage are encouraged and supported in their increased independence, they become more confident and secure in their own ability to survive in the world. But if children are criticized, they're overly controlled or overprotected, or they are not given the opportunity to assert themselves, they begin to feel inadequate in their ability to survive. And they may even become overly dependent, no? They may become overly dependent sa parents, sa other people, and then they would definitely lack self-esteem, and they will feel a sense of shame or doubt in their abilities. Next is initiative versus guilt. This is the third stage of Eric Erickson's theory of psychosocial development. And during the stage of initiative versus guilt, children assert themselves more frequently through direct play. So they have other people already. They are able to interact, no? They have social interaction already at this stage. A healthy balance between initiative and guilt is important. So uh it's not really healthy if puro initiative lang. It's not really healthy if puro guilt lang. But there should be a healthy balance. And success in this stage will lead to the virtue of purpose, while failure results in a sense of guilt. Next is industry versus inferiority. So it occurs at 5 years old until 12. And in this stage, some failure may be needed. No, it may be needed. Uh, sa the child might need to fear inferior sometimes. So a healthy balance again is needed, since feeling inferior or like failing or making a mistake, it will develop the child will develop modesty. Okay, so success, of course, in this stage will lead to the virtue of competence. Next is identity versus role confusion. 12 years old to 18 years old. So during this stage, adolescent na ang child. So or ang young person, adolescent. So there is what we call a search for the sense of self, or ang iyang personal identity. So this can be done through intense exploration of personal values, beliefs, and goals. And not necessarily nga dapat idikta mo lang sa iya. So dapat siya mismo ang nag-explore. And during this period, they explore possibilities and they begin to form their own identity based upon the outcomes, kung ano man to ang na-explore nila. But failure to establish a sense of identity within society. So for example, amo na ni edad niya, but he still doesn't know what course to take, no? Or he doesn't know what he wants to be when he grows up, no? So it can lead to role confusion. Role confusion involves the individual not being sure about themselves or their place in the society. And of course, in response to role confusion or what we call the identity crisis, the adolescent may begin to experiment. Since wala siya kabalo kung ano yung role wala siya kabalo kung diin siya dapat. So may experiment siya with different lifestyle. Ma-hang out siya with different group of people, ma-jump siya from work to work, mailis-ilis siya minds about say a kurso, something like that. Also, pressuring someone into an identity. For example, the parent na ginapush nila nga dapat amo ni kurso kwaon mo, etc., etc. It can result in rebellion and also in a form of establishing a negative identity. No, so if you have or you already have this, you feel negative about yourself. Of course, you will have this feeling of unhappiness. Next is intimacy versus isolation. This stage takes place during young adulthood between 18 to 40 years old. And during the stage, the major conflict enters in forming intimate relationships, intimate, loving relationships, or commitment, no, with other people. Successful completion, some intimacy versus isolation, it can result in happy relationships and a sense of commitment, no, safety, and care within a relationship. And of course, avoiding intimacy, um, sa full fear, may takot kayo sa commitment and relationships. Of course, it can lead to isolation, lonely, let's say sometimes you'll be a loner or yeah, and then loneliness and sometimes depression. And as you can see there, the basic virtue, if you are successful, is the virtue of love. Next is generativity versus stagnation, ages 40 to 65 years old. Success in this stage leads to feeling of usefulness and accomplishment, while failure um, results in the wala ka lang pakialam, no, in the world. So may shallow involvement ka lang, hindi ka committed, no, to help the community, etc., etc. So by failing to find a way to contribute, we become stagnant and we feel unproductive. These individuals may feel disconnected or uninvolved with their community, with their society, and yeah, in the world as a whole. And of course, success in this stage will lead to the virtue of care. Last psychosocial crisis is the ego integrity versus despair. This, as you can see, it begins approximately at the age of 65 and ends at death. So it is during this time that we contemplate our accomplishments and we can develop integrity if we see ourselves as leading a successful life if we look back, right? So success in this stage, it will lead to the virtue of wisdom. Wisdom enables a person to look back sa iyang life and may ara siyang sense of closure and then completeness or satisfied na siya, no? And also, uh, a wise person can accept death without fear. So, wise people are not characterized by a continuous state of ego integrity, but of course, they should have been able to experience despair as well. So, again, there should be a balance between ego integrity and despair. Thus, uh, late life, no, uh, elderly life, it is characterized by both integrity and despair, but alternating states siya dapat. And again, should be balanced. All right, let's go with the last person that we're going to talk about. Siya si Karen Horney. She is a psychoanalyst and a theorist who suggested that people possess a number of neurotic needs that play a role in driving behavior. So we will see later what these neurotic needs are. So si Karen Horney, one of the notable, or like she stands alone as the only woman that that should be recognized, no, worthy to be recognized because of her works in psychoanalysis. Because the first two, they focus mainly, since Freud and Erikson, focus mainly on the development of males. Kaya of course, there sila nakarelate. But with Karen Horney, she also studied female subjects. So, uh, yeah, she gave more time to study female subjects, and she has this what we call the basic anxiety, no? And where children, they have their interpersonal relationship styles and intrapsychic conflicts that is determined by what you experience in the past as a child. So it is also shaped, according to her, it also shapes the child's personality and how the child deals with a certain situation when the child reach adulthood. So experiences, childhood experiences, Horn Eye, she believes that neurotic conflict can stem from almost any developmental stage, but ang mga childhood experiences are the most important, no? Because this is where the vast majority of problems can arise. So she hypothesized that a difficult childhood is primarily responsible for neurotic needs. And these needs become powerful because they are the child's only means of gaining feelings of safety. But of course, she also she also knows, or she also suggests that no single early experience is responsible for later personality, but the sum total, no? The sum total of all the experiences, that is what is responsible of the development. She believed that each person begins life with a potential for healthy development. But of course, like other organisms, such as, for example, plants, no, in order to be healthy, or in order to develop uh, healthily, you know, people also need favorable conditions. So, mga multitudes ng adverse influences, they may interfere with the favorable condition, and ang pinaka-primary nga factor is the parents. So, for example, the parents' inability or unwillingness to love their child, dako gid ang magiging effect sa individual nga ni or sa child nga ni when he or she grows up. So, because of their own neurotic needs, some parents, they often sometimes, no, some parents, they often dominate, they neglect, they overprotect, they reject, or they overindulge sa ilang child. So, if the parents do not satisfy the child's needs for safety and satisfaction, the child develop feelings of hostility. toward a parent. However, children seldom overtly express or obviously express this hostility as rage. So instead, they repress. No? So do you remember the definition earlier of repression? So they repress their hostility toward their parents, and this can lead to profound feelings of insecurity and a vague sense of apprehension. So this is what she called the basic anxiety. So here is the graphical representation for that. She believed that basic hostility and basic anxiety, they are interwoven. That's why the arrows are pointing at both boxes. So hostile impulses are principal source of basic anxiety. Correct. But basic anxiety can also contribute to feeling of hostility. Although, gin-amend niya ni before ang apat, amo ni ang very first yung idea. No? So the first is affection. This is a strategy daw that does not always lead to authentic love. No? So affection is not always authentic love. So in their search for affection, some people may try to purchase love with self-effacing compliance, no? um, material goods, or sexual favors. Second, a protective device is submissiveness. Neurotics may submit themselves or be submissive with uh, their their partner, or like other people or institution or organization or even religion, no? So neurotics who submit to other person often do so in order to gain affection, and neurotics may also try to protect themselves by striving for power, or number three is prestige or possession. So in order to not be controlled, they have this urge to control other people, right? And in order to protect themselves against humiliation, they feel the need or may tendency sila nga mag-humiliate others, right? So, etc., etc. And the fourth is withdrawal. Some neurotics frequently protect themselves against basic anxiety by developing independence. And how do they reach? How do they come up with their idea of independence? Naga-withdraw sila from other people. No, they become emotionally detached from other people. So by psychologically withdrawing, neurotic feels that they cannot be hurt by other people. So you cannot, para sila, you cannot hurt me if I don't really feel anything about you. So something like that. So here are the 10 neurotic needs according to Horneye. Uh, these needs were more specific than the four that we previously discussed. Kamo tong una, but then gin refine or gin specify ang each, and they describe, but also they describe the same basic defense strategy. So for the first one, the neurotic need for affection and approval, no? In their quest for affection and approval, neurotics attempt indiscriminately to please others, and they try to live up to the expectations of others. They tend to dread self-assertion, and they are quite uncomfortable with the hostility of others as well as the hostile feelings within themselves. So, by neurotic need for affection and approval. For number two, neurotic need for a powerful partner, lacking self-confidence. Some neurotics try to attach themselves to a powerful partner. So this needs includes an overvaluation of love and a dread of being alone or deserted. So Corn Eye's own life story actually do amo ni, no, makarelate siya. So ado amo ang iya mga relationship. Do may ara siya neurotic need for a powerful partner. Next is neurotic need to restrict oneself within narrow borders. Um, Neurotics frequently strive to remain inconspicuous, just to be, for example, since narrow border lang, they some neurotics they want to be just to be second place only, and they are very contented with very little. They downgrade their own abilities and they dread making demands on others. Number four, the neurotic need for power. Power and affection are perhaps the two greatest neurotic needs sa Bukidnon. And the need for power is usually combined with the needs for prestige and possession and manifests itself as the need to control others and to avoid feelings of weakness or stupidity. Number five, the neurotic need to exploit others. Neurotics frequently evaluate others on the basis of how they can be used or exploited, no? But at the same time, they fear being exploited by others. So in order for them to, since since nakulbaan sila nga, kumbaga gamiton lang sila, no? Their tendency is to use other people. Number six, the neurotic need for social recognition or prestige. We've already talked about this earlier. Some people combat basic anxiety by trying to be first, to be important, to be the one on the spotlight. No? So they attract attention to themselves. Number seven, the neurotic need for personal admiration. Neurotics have a need to be admired, or yeah, they need to be they feel the need that other people should praise them, should love them, or should look up to them for what they are rather than for what they possess. So their inflated self-esteem must be continually fed by the admiration and approval of others. Number eight, the neurotic need for ambition and personal achievement. Neurotics often have a strong drive to be the best. So, for example, the best student, the best uh, the best child of the parent, no? Or the best salesperson, the best agent, etc., etc. So they feel like they must defeat other people in order to confirm their superiority. Number nine, the neurotic need for self-sufficiency and independence. No? Those parehas nisa sa withdrawal earlier. Many neurotics have a strong need to move away from people, thereby proving that they can get along nga sila lang, no, without the help of others. So, the for example, ang playboy, no? Playboy persona nga hindi wala siya wala siya need for commitment kay para siya he cannot be tied down by any woman. No? So, amo na siya. Lastly, the neurotic need for perfection and unassailability. So, by striving relentlessly for perfection, neurotics receive proof of their self-esteem and personal superiority. So, they dread making mistakes. Very perfectionist. Dapat wala agad sila, hindi sila magsala. Dapat para hindi sila paghabalan sa iban nga hindi sila perfect, no? And they desperately attempt to hide their weaknesses from others. So that's the 10 neurotic needs, and here is the summary for that. So as you can see there, ang neurotic needs nga pulo kabilog, nakalista, and then ang neurotic trend. Magsiling ka nga trend, ano, din siya pakadto, no? So, is it toward people, is the kumbaga ang neurotic moving toward people, or neurotic moving against people, or neurotic moving away from people. So you can see there's a chart. Okay, So that is all for the psychological view of self from Freud, Erikson, and Horner.